The format commandlets are going to be used in certain occasions. There are only 3 format commandlets that exist that you will work with to modify the displayed format on your screen. There is format wide, which is going to work against a single property and format those in multiple rows and multiple columns. Format list is going to be taking your output and displaying each property in a list and separating each object by a blank line. Format table is going to be the one you are most familiar with. It is what get-service uses and get-process uses by default. Let's take a look at using format wide. In this example, we're going to show a specific property in 2 columns. The reason it is going to be in 2 columns is that is the default behavior of format wide. You can also specify the number of columns that property will be displayed in. In this example, we are going to display it in 4 columns. And you can also show these services grouped by a specific column. Now notice that this example is on 2 lines. In all reality, this is a single PowerShell pipeline. It would just be too small of a text to read if I would have placed it in a single line on this PowerPoint slide. What we are doing in this one is we are taking the objects from get-service and sorting them by the status property. We are then piping them to a format wide where we select the property name and we're going to group it by the current status. Let's take a look at the format list commandlet. You can easily force a command to have its output in a list by just typing format list. You can also show specific properties similar to select object, but this time it will force it to be in a list. Similar to format wide, you can also use the group by parameter. This will force like objects to be grouped together. Now keep in mind, you must use a sort object first, otherwise they will not be grouped correctly. And finally, using the format table. In this example, we are going to get the PS snap-ins that are available. The reason we are not using get-service in this example is because that one's default output is format table. Get PS snap-in is one of the few commands that by default returns in a list. You can see that the next example we used was get-service, but this one we're treating very similar to a select object, where we are specifying which properties we want to be displayed. And again, we can use the group by parameter to group like objects by a specific property. Let's go ahead and jump into the demonstration of using the format commandlets. We are going to use DC1 to perform this demonstration. We will open Windows PowerShell and start with a get-process. We will then format it wide and specify the property process name. Notice that by default, it is listing those process names in 2 columns. Let's change that. Let's take the same commandlet we just ran by hitting the up arrow on the keyboard to go to the previous command, and let's add the column property, and let's say 5 columns. We will now see the specified property name, process name, of those objects displayed in 5 columns. Let's take a look at another example. When we use get-service, we're seeing a table of objects and columns. Let's format this one wide. Let's then select the property name and specify the group by property of status. Now, think back to on the slide where I mentioned you must sort these first. Here is why. When we run this, we are going to see multiple groups that look the exact same. We've got a lot of groups. Some are stopped, some are running. Some have one object in them, some have multiple objects in them. That's not what we wanted to have in our output. What we need to do is correct this commandlet. We must take get-service and then pipe it to a sort object. And we need to sort this object by the property status. And then we can pipe that to the format wide. That looks much better. You will see that we've got the status stopped and all of the services that are in a stopped state in 2 columns. Same thing with the status running. 2 columns of the process names. Let's now take a look at the format list commandlet. Let's run git process and format list. That looks a bit different. It's showing you the ID, the handles, the CPU, and the name. Notice that not as many of the properties were returned as they do when the default view of table is displayed. You can correct that by specifying all of those property names. I don't want to see all of those properties. I'm happy with this default output. But let's take this a step further. And let's sort this object and only show unique results. And then we want to format this to a list with the property name, process name, and CPU. So let's take this a step further. Now that we've taken a look at the processes being formatted as a list, let's take a look at the services being formatted as a list. Let's run a git-service, and on this git-service, we are going to format as a list. On this format list, I want to select specific properties, including the name, the status, and I want to group it by the status itself. Notice that I now have multiple lists, but the grouping can be duplicated. For example, I've got a couple of services here that are in a stopped state. I've got some that are in a running state, and again, I've got some that are in a stopped state. The reason being is I did not do a sort initially on these. So right after the git service commandlet, we want to pipe this to a sort. I am going to use the sort alias instead of the sort object commandlet to save typing. On this sort commandlet, we need to specify we want to sort by the status property. I'm also using a positional parameter on this instead of a named parameter to save even more typing. Now when I run this, you will see that we have a grouping in the list format of the services that are running and the services that are stopped.